Hello and bienvenue. I'm your host Anaïs, and it's my pleasure to welcome you to Her Career, Her Coach, the podcast dedicated to empowering women to build a career they are truly passionate about. I am very happy to welcome today's guest, Sudeshna, who described herself as an efficiency and optimization nerd, both in business and in life, which obviously very much I'm resonating with. I think we are on for a very interesting conversation together, especially because Sudeshna has changed career fields. So without further ado, let's dive into this together and welcome, Sudeshna. It's a pleasure to have you.
Thank you so much for having me, Anais. So it's a pleasure.
It's a pleasure to have you here too. So tell us more about yourself.
So I'm Sudeshna. I am an economist by training, and I work in the financial services industry in the UK currently. I was born and raised in India, and I think as a very creative child, I was almost led to love math because all the careers around me were very scientific, very maths oriented. And I think I got into that really fast. Therefore, I have a thing for data and numbers and technology. But I also have this creative side of me, which is very, very, it doesn't take me much to create content. It doesn't take me much to write a blog post. So I think that's been sort of a blessing and also, in some sense, a bit of a curse in my
Really?
career. You know what? I love it all because I get to explore so many things that people generally tend to not put together very often.
I love that. I love what you shared about embracing the creativity side of things, but also the more, I would say, number-driven side of things, if that's okay with you.
Yeah. The more logical, the more
Exactly.
numbers. Yeah,
Yeah, the right brain versus left brain, right? So
absolutely.
would you say it's a 50-50 split? Would you say it depends on the situation? Where do you stand on that?
I think it very much depends on the situation.
Mm.
I think because I have a very rigorous analytical training, I will always ask 100 questions before I come to a conclusion about
Mm.
anything. Very often I don't draw conclusions. I just look at things the way they are. And on the creative side, I think I'm more fun. I'm more of a creative thinker, even when it comes to data and technology and things like that, which is not very common in
Mm.
that world, I think. So yeah, I would probably say 50-50 depending on where we are.
Mm-hmm. That's fair enough. To be honest, I would say definitely from my side of things as well. It very much depends on the situations. So I think it would be really interesting before we dive into your career achievements and challenges to know a little bit more about what drives you. What is it that you're passionate about?
Very good question. And I think for the younger part of my life, it was a drive to make money.
Mm-hmm.
And, I come from a land which has been partitioned in while India was getting its independence. And like we sort of, as immigrants, and I'm sort of air quoting here, to India, because our main property, lands, whatever, all our heritage was across the partitioned land. And we had to, like, my family moved to India. Well, part of my family moved to India, part of my family were in India like for like generations together. So I think in that context, my family sort of valued money from a very practical perspective, that they had a lot and then they had nothing,
Mm.
almost, because nothing remained because of the partition. And that sort of drove into me a very practical notion about money.
Mm-hmm.
And it's a really useful tool in the world. But equally, I think I remember my mom telling me when I was younger that, money is not everything in life, and there is no end to how much you can need, but it's about finding happiness. And I think now that I'm in a more relatively comfortable sort of place where I have everything that I want. I don't have too many wants. So I'm not
Mm.
like someone who has like a huge list of desires of flying on private jets and whatnot. So I don't have that many desires. So I feel like right now, what drives me is doing good in the world and finding happiness and joy. And like I told you at the beginning of the interview itself, that the creativity is a bit of a boon and a curse at the same time. And I
Mm.
think the curse is that therefore I find myself busy all the time. Like I will find something, I will never get bored, and I'll find something. And I think always having your brain go on finding something to do and keeping yourself busy has a cost of its own, and it costs in happiness and joy and being present in the moment. So yeah, I think my current challenge to myself and what drives me is finding joy and spreading joy.
No, I very much love that. I mean, all of that, so much to unpack as well. I mean, what you shared around your background and what has been going through your family, what happened, potentially had a massive impact as well in terms of, for example, your relationship with money. I'm sure among many other things. I feel like this is definitely something that we don't necessarily talk much about. I mean, full disclosure, I would love for money to be a mandatory subject at school, even though, you're very young and you've got other things to think about than money. I feel like essentially we are not very much educated when it comes to having a healthy relationship with money. We usually have, whether we realize it or not, the luggage or the heritage, but not necessarily in a positive way, that's coming from our family and the way our parents handle money, for example. So I know for me, this has also played a huge component in terms of my relationship with money. Don't get me started on launching and starting my own business while still paying a student loan that I'm still paying to this day. The whole concept around, debt and all of these things is
Mm.
there's so much in there, right? And I know it's also something that you're very much exploring yourself, right? The whole theme around money, but the fact that we just don't necessarily talk a lot about this or not enough, to my opinion.
Yeah, I definitely think that we don't talk enough about money. And I think money is such an interesting subject because
Mm.
everyone has an emotion attached to money, whether that be a good emotion, whether that be a bad emotion, whether that
Yeah.
be a mix of the two. And I think half our problems would be solved if we solved the core emotions that, or address the core emotions that lead us to view money in a certain way, other than it just being a neutral tool. You can, like, you can use a hammer to hit someone's on the head, or you can use it to like put a nail on the wall. The hammer is just a tool. It's not good or bad. And I think that's what money is as well. And I definitely do think that people don't talk enough about it. Also, probably because they don't know any better.
Mm.
So, yeah.
Thank you so much for taking the time to share a bit more about yourself and what you're passionate about. I love the fact that you said it's about bringing joy. So let's move on to your career achievements. Would that be okay to share what have been your top three?
Yeah, of course. My career achievements, I think I was quite lucky in the sense that I got the right set of parents, and therefore they valued education really, really highly. And
Mm.
then I went to the top schools, and then I had almost a paved path for success, if you will, in many ways. Well, I we did write like a ton of entrance exams, and I was academically inclined, and all of that aside, I think without acknowledging the fact that I was actually extremely lucky to being born to the right set of parents, right? So that aside, I think what my achievements have been the most precious to me, I think, are really working on those super impactful projects. And I have worked across regulations, technology, strategy, setting up new businesses, you name it. Like, I have done it all in my career. And I can't tell you one project that was better than the other. It was more around the impact of each of those projects.
Mm.
So, for example, when I was with my two companies before, I was with a Big Four accounting firm, and as a part of their working group, I wrote a paper on AI standards, and that was picked up by the ISO committee, and like the ISO, so international standards,
Mm.
were put together around that piece of work. And I think that'll be sort of one of the most important jobs that I have ever done in my career when we look forward, I hope. It's been 5 years since that's been published, but we are just literally getting started on this AI journey with
Mm.
ChatGPT and whatnot, right? And like that, there have been others like seminal pieces of work within regulations. So I worked on a project where we were putting together the regulatory framework for a country, the banking regulatory framework, and we literally, the core model was written by us, and me and a colleague of mine, the two of us together, even sat down and came up with that model ourselves. So I think when you think about the impact of the work, that is in itself humbling. My name won't be on any of this, obviously, because it was not really me doing the work. I was working as a part of the firm,
Mm.
but when I think about the impact that it has on the world, I think that's huge. So I think I have been therefore very lucky in working on very high impact projects through my career. So I would say that is an achievement in my eyes. You asked about three, and I think the next one would be probably the number of career changes I have made. And when I say career
Mm.
changes, I mean not necessarily changing companies, but changing my roles within those companies. And I think I
Mm.
have gone through about working in 10, 11 different roles over the course of 15 years, which is
Wow.
a very, very high number of changes, if you will. And I think one of the most successful parts of my career has been the fact that I've gotten to explore whatever I wanted to, and I have gotten to do that quite unapologetically. I did not ever have to take, like, cut in my salary or sacrifice my financial security or mental health or physical health to go try out a new way of doing things. So in that, I think I've been incredibly, again, lucky to have employers who have always encouraged me to try out things that I have wanted to do. And I think in that, I've grown so much as a person that I can only be grateful for that. Yeah,
Right. I loved everything that you shared. And actually, I just want to dive almost into every single one of them, if that's okay with you.
of course. Yeah.
I mean, first of all, I see that in the work that I do with my clients, a lot of them, when we start working together, definitely have lost a sense of what it is a meaningful career for them. So the fact that you've been able to make an impact on people's or, collaborating as part of a team and therefore made an impact on even the way things are being done, especially in the context of AI, I feel it's really truly inspiring because a lot of people don't necessarily know what it means for them to have a fulfilling career. And I would say potentially having an impact is definitely something to consider. For some people, having an impact doesn't necessarily mean to have an impact at a large scale. Could even be having an impact as in like being a manager or being a leader, for example, and having an impact in that sense. So I feel like the one question I need to ask you is, what would you say is the one thing driving you when it comes to making an impact?
I'll tell you what, I generally have never thought about I want to make an impact.
Mm.
I
Yep.
have always approached it as what is it that I'm good at and I currently feel like doing. So if I
Mm.
get into my head a bit, I generally am a person who has a lot of curiosity and I'm very, very multi-passionate. Therefore, one of the curses, like I say, that it comes with is that I will have my attention on a certain topic for a limited amount of time. And I know that within that time, whatever I have to do in that subject, I have to do, and that's all that I have. Right. So, say, for example, if you knew that you are going to do something for 3 years, how do you make sure that your skills lend themselves to the best of its abilities to that
Mm.
project for the next whatever 2.5 3 years, right? So
Yep.
I have really approached it from this is what I want to do and how do I do the best in this, and the impact sort of has followed on from there. For example, when I was with the Big Four consulting firm, the thing that was driving me is that where is this artificial intelligence space going? People were talking a lot about bias. Well, I lie. People were not talking about bias back in the day.
Mm.
Only after we started working on it and, you know, we wrote papers on it, blogs on it, consulted the ISO. After that, Cambridge Analytica broke for the first time, the news broke, and
Mm-hmm.
we had been talking about that at that point for at least the past 5 6 months. And when you follow your curiosity, you sort of like no one can beat you in doing that. And you tend to find insights that you would just not find if you were normally looking at it, right? Like if you were looking at it, oh, how do I have the most impact? But if you sort of follow that rabbit hole of curiosity, you find things that are not so obvious to other people who are operating at the surface level. So dig deep, dig deep, dig deep, and then you'll find something that'll either have a lasting impact or you'll learn something and you can pass it on to someone who will make it impactful, or you can pass it on to the next phase of your career and then join whatever you are doing currently with that and sort of cook it together in your own sort of unique recipe.
I think what you've just shared here is definitely priceless. Essentially, it actually answers the second question I wanted to ask you when it comes to the different career changes that you've made. Because again, 10 to 11 career changes in the space of 15 years definitely says a lot about the fact that you've been able to follow that curiosity of yours. And this is what you've kept at the heart of your career. And I feel like what sometimes gets in the way is the external distraction, whether it's the sort of industry standards or the expectations from family members, close ones, you name it. There are so many things happening in life that could just pull you or push you out of your way. And I feel like what you said is definitely essential to truly be happy in your career. It's about tapping into your inner self, even though it seems like it's counterintuitive. This is pretty much where you can find most of the answers. The follow-up question I have for you on that is, how did you manage not to get distracted by others in the way?
It's a very good question. And I think it comes back to being me. And
Mm-hmm.
I know that a lot of people around me, a lot of my friends, we started at the same place back in the day. They are still in that career line. And we are friends till this day. And I'll sometimes ask them that, do you not feel that you want to do something else? And they are like, no, we like becoming the experts in our own
Mm.
area. And I think that's priceless as well, because that has a
True.
value of its own. But I think for me, my superpower has always been sort of being the Jill of all trades, if you will.
Yeah.
And therefore connecting things across the board rather than being super deep. And I think I have depth in a couple of areas, which is, data and technology. I've been working in data for most of my career in one form or the other. So I have a deep expertise in data. I have deep expertise in financial services because I have also worked in financial services for most of my career. Also marketing, because I have done a lot of stuff around marketing since, or even before I graduated, actually. So I was doing a digital marketing back in the day when digital marketing was not even a thing. Back in 2006, I give away my age.
Wow.
I was doing this copywriting, content writing for the internet entrepreneurs. And I think, therefore, I have quite a few deep skills as well. But one of my acquaintances, he put it very well. Like, you need people who are T-shaped these days. So when they say T-shaped, it means you are deep in one subject and then you have a broad understanding of a lot of subjects.
Got it. Yeah.
And and to that, I sort of add, like, oh, but why be a T when you can be pi? Um, so so I sort of think of myself as a more pie-shaped person so that, I can connect across the board. And you need both sorts of people in the world to be working together, right? If you
Mm,
had only one or the other, we just wouldn't have a conducive world.
100%. Can I just double check though? Is it pi as in pi, the unfinished number in geometry?
That is right, yes. And
So
how you
funny.
write it in Greek, it's
Yes.
sort of, instead of a T, it has
Yeah,
like
yeah, it's
a two.
100%.
Yeah,
It's
yeah,
curvy, isn't it?
yeah, yeah.
Mm, very interesting. You know what? You might be reconciliating me with numbers, or at least definitively I might use your analogy when it comes to, teas and pies later down the line. I love that. Here's to you being a pie. Very much love that. All right. Would that be okay to dive into your career challenges?
Absolutely.
Let's look at the other side of the curtain.
Mm-hmm.
So, what would you say have been your top three?
The top three, I think, like I said, the first one is just, why can't you be like other people? Why can't you just focus on one thing? Like, it's a pain to live in my head because I have so much curiosity. I'm almost jumping from the one thing to the other, and actually being able to, you know, answer people as to why I'm not following that path that is quite a linear path in many ways. Like where I started, when I started in Big Four consulting, I could have literally stayed on and grown through the ranks and grown substantially quite linearly. Why did I not do that? So I think explaining things and how my brain works to other people has been sometimes a bit of a challenge, but then,
Right.
and of course that comes with a lot of self-doubt, because I have always worked with very, very smart people, incredibly smart people. And when they question your decisions, you almost wonder, well, is there some validity to that? What if they were right? What if I don't end up having anything, right? So the
Mm,
fear of losing it all, I think, is a very real fear and a very real challenge. The other one that comes to mind is around, we are not really rewarded for being T-shaped or pie-shaped people, if you will. The career paths, or the traditional career paths, generally tend to make you an expert, and that's how our education system is set up. That's how, you become masters of economics or a PhD or a whatever. So tend to narrow down on your expertise. But I think the fact that, having a view across the board is so important. It doesn't often reflect in a lot of career metrics and graphs. Though I think, to be honest with you, we are getting better at it. And I have been speaking to some HR professionals who are looking at like skill matrices and all of that. And I think that is a challenge that will hopefully ease with time, and people will be more rewarded for being sort of, who they are,
Yeah.
essentially. And then the third challenge, and this probably is not for everyone, but for me, this definitely was something that when I moved from India to the UK, I sort of moved from like the financial capital of India to the financial capital of, dare I say, the world, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I was convinced that I would not get a job, right? I was like, who will hire me there? They're like really smart people, and what do I know? What will I have? And I think it took me at least 3 to 4 years of coming out of that shell, even though when I moved to the UK, the very next day, I think I landed at Heathrow on 23rd of September, and 24th of September, I started applying for jobs. And by
Right.
that December, I had like 4 offers.
Nice.
So it was never really a question of did I have the skills, or it was never really a question of would I be successful at a global scale. It was something deeper than that I needed to sort of unpack for the next 3 to 4 years in my career. And what I realized was that, coming from India again, and of course, everyone's life is there and their perspectives are different. But I thought that I was very exposed, and I had a lot of exposure by the time I had come to London. But even then, what I found was that in myself, a lack of confidence, a
Mm.
lack of navigating the corporate culture, the politics of the situation. I would not, for example, understand a lot of the British way of talking. So the communications, like you think you know English, and then you realize that you don't know English, as
Mhm.
in you don't know what they're really saying. You can understand what they are saying, literally speaking, but you don't really understand the nuances of the language. Like a famous one that everyone quotes is that, oh, interesting. And when a British person says, oh, interesting, it's sort of like, oh, that's not really good, is it?
True.
so I think just navigating that was a huge challenge in the first 3 to 4 years of me being here. I definitely got better at it over the years, but I feel like anyone who beats themselves up for, not doing as well as they should in their heads when they have moved countries, continents, cultures, I think have a lot of grace for yourselves, because, well, these people have grown up with this culture for like 20, 30 years. They know what they are talking about. You are the outsider who sort of are very quickly trying to learn what they have known for, 20 years, right? So I think that was quite an interesting one, like
Mm.
navigating culture, communication, and the impact it had on my confidence.
Yeah. And I'm so glad you're bringing this one up because essentially this is also part of the core of the work that I do with my clients. I mean, personally speaking, I've been living in the UK for 8 years, so definitely I resonate with you, especially when you start in, let's say, a corporate career that does involve daily interactions with people whose native language and native culture is in the country that you are in that you have just
Mm.
no clue about. So all of the references of TV shows and artists and inside jokes or sort of like common jokes that I just had no idea what they were talking about. And I know for some of my clients, it's also the same. They either are and have been sort of thriving abroad, but they had to go through that learning curve themselves, and or they're considering their next move. I'm very happy for anyone who is listening right now, to all of you who in 2022 made that show, listened into 24 countries. To be honest, I feel like this is an additional layout I'm always looking to dive further into, which is not only how to navigate your career when you're a woman, but also when you are not necessarily coming from that initial country, like when this is just not where you were born, essentially. And I'm just curious to know. I'm so glad that you've shared your experience on the topic. Thank you for that, Sudeshna. I'm curious to know, would you say that a couple of years down the line, is this still something that is sort of impacting your confidence? Is it something that now is almost like behind you? How do you feel around this whole topic?
I think it's behind me
Mm-hmm.
because I sort of, again, what I do best is I look at data and I then
Mm-hmm.
analyze. And what I have realized is that, I probably have more exposure than any of the people, which should really give me the confidence. Just to put that in perspective, some of the people or my colleagues who were born and raised here and have been here all their lives, they just don't know another culture. They don't know how working in another country or another continent could
Mm.
feel like. And I think that is the beauty of London, that you get to work with people who have worked across the world. And when we find a lack of confidence and lose our voice because we have come from another place, that just makes our impact a lot less. But also, like, the reason you were hired is because you have a voice. And if you don't use that voice, it sort of takes away not only from you, but also does a massive disservice to your colleagues, to your co-workers, and to the organization that you're working with. So I think just putting things into perspective now, the way I think about it is like, well, I might not understand everything that they say. And if I don't, I can ask them. But I can also add my own perspective to it because, you know, people used to talk about, if you are bilingual, your brain operates differently. But if you are like multicultural, I'm sure your brain operates differently as well.
Sure.
So just, I think, leaning more into that, I have been more confident.
Thank you so much for that. And I think it actually leads nicely into the final part of the podcast. You already shared a lot through your experience along the way, but any recommendations that you like to make for any woman looking to make the most out of their career? Whereas is the whole left, right side of the brain, navigating a career abroad, the different roles that you've had, the many roles that you've had actually over the past 15 years, and or beyond that, any recommendations that you'd like to share with the audience?
I think one person I have followed quite closely in the last couple of years has been Naval Ravikant. He's a Silicon Valley entrepreneur, founder of AngelList, and I resonate a lot with him and how
Mm,
he talks about careers and career changes and things like that. So if you want to check him out, I think he did a really great podcast with Joe Rogan that you can find on YouTube.
nice. And we can add the
So
details of
yeah,
his profile along with the show. Yeah.
yeah. So I think I absolutely love what Naval has to say on most topics. And sometimes I think that, he is a sort of like, if I could ever have a twin brain, it's probably Nawal's brain, which is why
Nice.
I take whatever he says with a lot of gratitude, because he's a few years elder and therefore I'm sure a few years wiser as well. So that's one. On money mindset and things like that, I'm yet to come across one that I find absolutely mind-blowing, but there are some that I think are quite interesting. So, for example, Ramit Sethi, he is again American entrepreneur, speaks a lot on money. I found his advice to be very practical and very tangible.
Mm.
And his podcast is actually quite interesting. So he has a podcast on money and love, which is
Interesting.
very interesting. And I think that is one of the podcasts that I found very fascinating in how people's money beliefs develop over the years, and how that impacts their current relationships and lives and so on. So I found that quite interesting.
That's all
I
right. It's interesting because your mind went into those two people. So if I may expand on that, it seems that definitely there is potentially a theme around finding mentors or twins, if I can just put it this way, who are definitely sort of inspiring you. Essentially, that's my take from what you shared.
100%. I think and this, like, it is so important to find mentors and study them. If you find them inspiring, study them and study their careers ruthlessly. So, for example, Nawal, I mean, obviously, he doesn't even know of my existence, but I try and read up everything that I can on how he makes his moves and things like that. Equally, Ramit, I know that Ramit knows of my existence, given that I have emailed him a few times and I have gotten responses back. But I also think that, well, he doesn't know me closely enough, but I know a lot more about him than he does about me. And I think one other thing that jumped to me as I was thinking about it is, I wonder if my brain jumped to those two specific people, if their color was a point that made me resonate with them a bit more, and like the context. And when I say color, I mean like their social context, like they understood where I'm coming from, they come from the same place, and then they are going to somewhere I want to go. So those are like mentors, and I don't think you need to find like 10. I think if you find two and you just go and do tons and tons of research into what they are and who they are being and what in them attracts you, and how you can be more of you, your version of you, rather than their version of them.
100%. I would definitely agree on that.
Yeah.
It's about making sure that whoever you choose to be around you, whether they know about it or not, you essentially are learning a lot from it. And whatever it is that you're learning, it's then your conscious choice to decide how much does it apply to the way you do things, the way you think about things, the way you challenge things, for sure. Very much love that. Thank you so much for sharing. As part of this season 2 tradition, I'd love to know from your end one word summarizing our conversation today.
I think it would be curiosity.
Ooh, yes, please. Love that. Well, thank you so much, Sudeshna, for allowing us to get to know you. I definitely want to be more curious now about what's out there in terms of mentors. So thank you so much for coming along.
Thank you so much, Anais. Loved the chat.
If you've enjoyed this episode, don't forget to subscribe and share it with anyone you believe would benefit from hearing it. Because as you know, life is too short to feel unfulfilled at work.